I'm speaking today with Suzanne Ingleton. I first saw Sue Ingleton, as I knew her, at the Pram Factory, and I remember her being hilarious. She was so funny. I laughed, and I can still remember laughing about the stand-up comedy that she did. It was wonderful, irreverent, feminist comedy. Now, Suzanne is known for many things. Her theatre is legendary, so legendary that she's had a number of important awards, including the Sidney Myer Individual Performing Arts Award, the Gloria Payton Award, as well as multiple Australia Council Asia Link grants and a whole lot of other things. She worked at the Melbourne Theatre Company, the Sydney Theatre Company, Belvoir, La Bois, Malthouse, La Mama, and a huge number of
No wonder she's exhausted.
outside of Australia, including New Zealand, the US, UK, Europe, Malaysia. So welcome today to Sue Ingleton.
Hello, and you are Susan Hawthorne, who is a publisher, renowned as a publisher with Renate Klein, her partner, of Spinifex Press, and we should all have at least a library full of those books.
What a good idea.
Yes, I don't know if it's working because
so today,
I can only see you.
Well, I think it is working.
All right.
So today we're going to talk about Sue's book, Making Trouble. I remember when I first read what you sent to me, I was actually really excited because there were so many fascinating things about the book. So tell me about why you wrote this book. It's called Making Trouble, Tongued with Fire, an imagined history of Harriet, Elphinstone, Dick, and Alice C. Moon.
It's interesting that you say how many things were in it, Susan, because I think as that was one of the things that I suppose in a way exhausted me, but in another way kept me alive in terms of research, and then hitting on one feminist thing, in the 19th century, then hitting on something else, then hitting on women in sport, and then, and so what actually started me to write this story, to find this story, were the two women themselves. Now, I will just qualify that by saying that when I write, I tune in a different way to story and to my higher self energies, and I open completely to being maybe channeling a story, letting these characters come to me. A lot of this is reflected in my stand-up comedy, where a lot of my stand-up comedy has been with character-based comedy, like The Pregnant Man and The Old Lady Edith. I have not invented these people. They have revealed themselves to me. So I trust this connection with spirit and with a shamanic process, utterly. So when I am signaled or receive information, I never ignore it. I have to deal with it. This all began, and we published it. When did we publish it? 2019, didn't we? So in 1995, I was working on a TV show in Melbourne called Mercury. That was at ABC TV. And I was playing the part of a sports editor in a Sunday newspaper called Mercury. And I had a little writing corral set up as a sports editor would, with, sporting books and things. And pardon me, I'm just going to burp. It's my prerogative. Oh, it's not going to come. It'll come when I don't need it. Sorry. There it is. What happens when you work in a great big television series, which had 7 or 8 episodes? We had a whole floor of a building, which was the whole setup of a Sunday newspaper. There were people here, there, everywhere. So when a scene is being shot right down the other side of the room with other characters, you have to be in the background to be seen doing what you do. I was the sporting editor. So I was doing background acting, right, which is incredibly boring and could go on for hours. So this particular day, which was in December, I think, bored out of my head, I picked this great big tome off the shelf that the people who dressed the set had put up there. It was the Australian Biography of Sport or Dictionary of Sport or something. And it's huge, you know. And so I sort of plonked it on the desk and I just opened it. And my eye just went straight to a name, which was Harriet Elphinstone Dick. And I looked at that and I read it. Basically, it said she had emigrated to Australia with her companion. We all know what that means. Alice C. Moon. So immediately I thought, here's a couple, lovely gay couple, come to Australia, 1875, 1876. And she was a champion swimmer. That was about all it said, basically. And interested in gymnasiums for women. I had I had just done a few years before a theatre show called Near Misses, in which had involved 3 years of intensive research into women's history, based mainly on Dale Spender's book, Women of Ideas and What Men Have Done to Them. Out of that book, I found all these women and also a couple who weren't in that book. I had just done a huge show. I'd done it at the International Festival of the Arts in Adelaide. I'd done some in North America. I'd performed it in Melbourne and Sydney. And here was another story. Here was two women, another woman's story, gone into history. We'll never know who they were. This is about it. And it's 2 lines in the Australian Dictionary of Sport, you know. But I just wasn't interested in doing that whole thing again. I didn't want to write another play. I've become very interested in writing for film and TV and short stories and stuff. Anyway, I shut the book. However, I was not shut to the story, you know, and these women have not set me free until I wrote this bloody book, okay? And I can get to the point where I needed to write the book. So do you want to, I'll leave it there for a minute.
So who did Harriet turn out to be? I mean, what was it what made Harriet tick? She grew up in Brighton.
They were both, Harriet and Alice were both born in Brighton. They both lived there. They met each other. But Harriet was this goddess of the sea. Harriet was the most extraordinary. There were 2 women, Harriet and her friend Helen Sageman. Both decided, they were teaching at Brill's Baths, and I have a photo of Brill's Baths taken at the time, which I can show at the very end, a couple of photos. But Harriet, when she met Alice, and this is, first, you got to know this. They've told me everything, okay? There's no letters. There's nothing written except newspaper articles about the things they did. I have no personality, anything from them. They have just fed me with this. And my imagination, that's why it is an imagined history, my imagination has just gone on a total roller coaster ride with this story, okay? So Harriet was a champion swimmer. She was in Brighton. She was a member of the Brighton Swimming Club. She taught swimming at the baths, and she wanted to teach women to get into the water. This is at the time when women wore so many clothes in the water, and they had trolleys, and they went down, and nobody saw their bodies, and blah blah blah. So this is in the 1860s in England, right? So Harriet meets Alice, and this is all in the book, and this is all how I imagined they would be. And she does this incredible swim from Shoreham. No, they didn't go from, they went from, they were going to go from Shoreham to Brighton. This was a sort of in the sea, the wild sea. and it was a 3-kilometre swim, 3-mile swim, in the open sea. She and Helen did this together. They had a lot of publicity. They had to change it, so they went from Hove down they went the opposite way and came back into Brighton that way, but it was still 3 miles. And it made the newspapers, and they were celebrated. And at this time, I've already have her meeting. She's already knows Alice, and Alice is madly in love with her because she's this goddess that steps out of the sea, and she's powerful and strong, and she's very beautiful. And Alice, of course, is very beautiful too. You know, they're both beautiful in that 19th century way, you know. So Harriet and Alice, when Alice is 18, Harriet is 20, they decide to emigrate to Australia. Again, I imagined, why did they think that? And I've got Dick Cavell, whose family all came and emigrated to Australia. I've got him meeting her. He was at the Brighton Swimming Club. You know, he says, why don't you come to Australia? You'll be free there to do whatever you want, you know, and blah, blah, blah. So they emigrated to Australia. They got on a boat in December 1875. They arrived in March 1876 in Melbourne, and Harriet begins to teach at the baths. There's some gorgeous scenes, you know, because I just love writing. I wrote this whole story for television. I wanted to make a television series out of it. I wanted to then make a film, and then that's not going to happen. So it all just became a book. I mean, it was just, you can write a book and get it done, you know, or a play, same thing. It's very hard to write a play for this. Too much water's involved. So I wrote it. I wrote so many scenes for the television series, you know, that it reads. I'd love to read a scene, you know, in a minute or so. But I am a playwright, you see, so I hear dialogue is a great thing for me to write. I just love writing dialogue, and I'm very good at writing dialogue, you know. And that also comes from stand-up comedy, you know, years of writing stand-up.
So they arrive in Melbourne. They eventually they live in Elgin Street, Carlton, which I know very well. And
which is now massage parlour.
Oh no, dreadful. And then poor old Harriet would roll over, and Alice would just go past her. But they do set up a gymnasium. They teach the daughters of the well-off women of Melbourne, and she insists that they remove their stays because otherwise they won't be able to breathe. And you have a great scene where one of the young women doesn't take off her stays and she half collapses. You know, there's wonderful stuff, which of course is what happens if you wear stays and you exercise.
Well, they were told they couldn't stand up straight unless they were in an iron corset. And then the iron corset developed into whalebone corsets. So these women are all strapped into dead whales, you know. You see, when I talk about the different things that began to be tackled, women's dress reform, education reform, physical education for girls was a complete no-no. And the crazy part was that men wanted women in these corsets, but the woman who was the woman who did all the laundry down the road, or the woman who had to work in the factory, she didn't wear corsets. You understand? There was a complete divide between women who were women and women who were just nothing.
Yes. Women who were, well, the sort
invisible.
Of put on the end of the hand.
Yeah, and invisible. But so many things kept. There were just so many threads and rabbit holes that I had to keep going, and then I would go down a rabbit hole when the women's hospital started, the shilling campaign that started with Constance Stone, who was the first female doctor in Melbourne, probably Australia. She had to go to America to get her degree. No one would give her a degree. Women couldn't go to university. So there was, every time something that would be happening in their lives, just had this balloon into yet another feminist issue. And it was hard to just keep a through line, because I have managed in the book to put little little clips and clues and things. But I never wanted to proselytize inside the book. So Alice was always keen on writing, and Alice has a lot of things where she's writing things to newspapers and letters to people and that sort of thing. Alice is a bit lost all in the beginning because Harriet takes Alice's money and sets up the gymnasium, and Alice works there with her, but it's not her passion. It's not her passion to teach girls how to swing clubs and march and everything.
Yes, that's what I noticed also, that Harriet really inhabits the first part of the book, absolutely. But about halfway through, you suddenly get a sense that Alice is a very different woman altogether. So, and has other interests, wants to do other things with her life and so forth. So who is Alice in the end? What does she bring to the relationship and to the story?
She loves Harriet. They fell in love in Brighton. Absolutely. Illegal love, you know. Alice has money. She comes from a wealthy home. Her father's a doctor. When they go to Australia, he sets her up with enough money to live there and everything. When her father dies, she gets more money. She pays for the gym. She pays for everything. Because Harriet comes from a very poor family of 6 or 7 children. Her father's a watchmaker. And as such, I would say Alice, like I always assumed Alice learned to ride. I always thought she's had a privileged upbringing. She would have learned to ride. And Harriet has never learned to ride. So when they end up in the farm in Beaconsfield, Harriet goes off to have riding lessons to sort of catch up with her, you know.
Yeah,
it's a terrible day where she's having an affair with Josephine, you know. So all of this, there's not one word written about these women, about who they are, what they did. There's just nothing, you know. And there's people all I have is newspaper advertisements and newspaper clips that mention Harriet giving a lecture or Alice. And then you research, you show they were members of the Australian Health Society, they were this, they were that. You find where they lived, you can go into Stan's directory. You know, I must admit, it's a real trap to start to do research because it's so alluring and it's so exciting. You become this detective in time, and at some point you just have to stop, you know, and you have to use what you've got and create the work, you know. But the book holds for me, I'll just go to that day which made me write the book, which made me have to know about the story. That was the day, and it was in the same year of 1995 when my daughter and I drove back up to Taylor's Arm where we were living, and she'd been living with me while I was doing this TV series, you know. Christmas interfered with the TV. You know, we had 6 weeks before and 6 weeks after. So I had to go back to Melbourne to finish the TV series. So we were driving home and we stopped in Brisbane and I'm in Sydney. I must have known at that point that Alice was buried at Old South Head Cemetery. I must have done some little bit of tweaking into the research. And on that particular day, it was just before Christmas, we drove to South Head Cemetery, and this most beautiful, it's right on the top of the heads, you know, just over the road is the cliff and the Pacific Ocean and seagulls everywhere. Seagulls have been this weird spiritual connection for me through this whole book, writing this whole book. I've had 2 visits to Brighton to specifically research everything in Brighton as well. So this particular day, we went to find the grave. And so there we are on the hill. It's on a hill. And Roxy, she was 14 at the time. She starts at the top and I start at the bottom, and we both have to go along the rows to work our way down. And she found it. She's not long. She'd just come down and she's screaming and dancing. I've got a photo of her. I'll do these after, I think. She found the grave, and we found the grave, and we went to the grave, and the grave was extraordinary because suddenly this person is there. She's in the ground, you know, like her bones are there. She's there in that grave, and suddenly she's real. She's not just a newspaper item. She's there. And I'm looking at the grave, and it's got her birth date, her death date, and then Roxy's dancing around, and she says, Mum, look, there's more women buried in the grave with her. There were 3 more women buried in that grave. Alice died in 1894. The other women died 1969, 1977. They were like all much older women than Alice. Each of them had a different name. And I go, what the fuck? What are these? Who buries 3 other women, all with different names? You never had any children. You were on your own in Australia. And then at the front of the grave was dirt and grass. And you'll see this in the photo. There was an inscription that was covered up. And we scraped away, and I read the inscription. The inscription was a quote from Job, and it said, "Where he giveth quietness, who then can make trouble?" And when I read this, my body just went into meltdown. Now, when this happens to me, I know that some terrible thing, some terrible truth is coming through me, okay? And when I read this, I remember the shivers going down my spine, and I just looked and I thought, who writes something like that on a grave? Where he giveth quietness, who then can make trouble? And it was like, what are you trying to say? And all of a sudden, these 3 women in the grave were like standing there, going, listen to us, and Alice is dead, and listen to us, So it was the most extraordinary moment. That's when I decided to write the book.
So finding the entry about Harriet prompted you to go to the cemetery, but finding the gravestone of Alice and the 3 other women was what actually really set you off on the path of the book. That was the absolute catalyst.
Yeah. Something terrible what belonged in that grave. Something terrible. And then that's when I started the research. I went back in, I found when Alice, all the obituaries. She was quite a famous pen lady. She was a journalist working for the Sydney Morning Herald, but she was a freelance writer. She had all these stories published in the Freeman's Journal and the Australasian, and eventually she got to the place where she wanted to be, which was to be a creative writer. And she moved to Sydney, and she and Harriet split up. Alice, through other connections, which you'll see in the book, moves to live with this woman, Mary Rose Merriweather. Mary Rose Merriweather lived in Double Bay. She was married to a lawyer called Walton Merriweather, who was not very nice. And she was the sister of Florence, who was on the left-hand side, and Selma was Florence's daughter on the right-hand side, and Edith Leary was Florence's sister. So the Leary girls, Florence Leary Parker, Edith Leary, unmarried, Selma Stewart Younger, Florence's daughter. So I found out they were all connected, of course, So Alice moves, she leaves. I mean, it's really painful. It's terrible. After doing all these things that she does, she built an organic farm, then she sold that, then she built a restaurant and she sold that. And meanwhile, Harriet's like trying to, hang in there, I think. Yeah. And then she goes, and then Alice says, look, I'm going. She says, well, how can we go to Sydney? She says, I'm going without you. You're not part of this,
So she'd actually taken quite a long time to try to help Harriet. Yeah,
88,
Harriet.
She sold the restaurant and she took off.
Yeah.
She had somewhere to go. She had a house to go to. She was invited. She lived with Mary Rose. And then, look, it's really hard to talk about all these connections that just kept coming from the clouds to me, they just kept going, oh my God, and it was like, it It was like the gods took me and they led me like this on this pathway of this story. There was one moment when they just would have gone from A to B, but they didn't. They went from A to X, Y, Z, you know, to get to the same place. And I understood then that without that intricate journey, I wouldn't have had it, you know. I wouldn't have had the story. It would have been too easy, and it just didn't mean anything, you know.
Now, we're down to about 15 minutes left of the Zoom. I'm wondering whether you want to do a spoiler and mention John McGarvey Smith and what role he plays in all of this, and why he has a place in the book.
Okay. Alice's death was the thing that the mystery of her death. The inscription referred directly to her death. And as I pursued finding out how she died of heart disease or heart attack, I found, okay, so this is how they work. I found one of the obituaries in the Sydney Morning Herald said she was working with a scientist at the time and that work has now come to an end. That's all it said. When I read that, my body goes into this meltdown mode. I mean, it really, you know, this is how it affects me. And I thought, well, it's got to be a male scientist because there were no female scientists then. Who was this man? But as soon as I read that, I knew that he was something to do with her death. I just knew. So all I could do was go to the library and look up the Australian Dictionary of Biography, which is full of the most terrible rubbish and lies and untruths. You just have to never believe anything you read in it. And I was looking for a scientist who, first of all, was alive in 1894 and in Sydney, so that I had to bring them within reach of each other. Alice was living in Double Bay. I don't know if Sydney people know where Double Bay is. And I opened up the Australian Dictionary Biography looking for scientists, and the year 2 were there. One was living out in Western Plains somewhere, and the other one was living in Woollahra. You can walk
just down the road.
You can walk from Woollahra to Double Bay.
Yes.
And his name was John McGarvey Smith. And this was very early in the piece that I got him. But for years, and this is years, I wrote all the scenes, I wrote him, but I had to choose another name because I could never connect him with Alice. I couldn't, there was nothing. His name just never came up. And finally, I think it was not long after, I know it was the winter solstice coming up to very soon in a minute. I think it was 2016. This is after writing this book and putting it away and writing it and getting so frustrated. I went back and I read all the obituaries again. And there was one particular obituary that had all the names of the people who were at her funeral. And it had started off with, and Harriet's name was there. And then there was, you know, Margaret Windale was there. You know, there were famous people there. And then there were names I didn't know. And I never finished reading it. And this particular night I read it right through to the end. And the second last name on this list was John McGarvey Smith. And I swear to you, I looked at it and I think I screamed. I was then working in a little studio at the back of my house, and I went outside I screamed. I said, "I've got you, you bastard!" It was just fantastic. I was like, why didn't I read this before? And again, it was like I had been tortured. So many things to do that got between me and I could have read that 8 years earlier. You know what I mean? It was like, no, and then this is the killer. Pauline Hopkins, who is our beautiful editor, she's read the book. She says, "Oh, didn't you see this obituary?" She sends me an obituary from some daily something in Sydney, which is word for word of the one in the Sydney Morning Herald, with the addition of 2 lines, which said, she's working with a scientist at the time, John McGarvey Smith, and his name is there, and she was his pupil, and it was like, again, why did you hide that from me? And it was hidden from me. I mean, it wasn't in that obituary. Can you imagine the 2 lines that would have led me? Anyway, so then I'm right. Okay, I'm right. So then I go for him. So then starts the most extraneous journey, which is to see who this man was. And again, the books are wrong. No one dares say, you know how they're pulling down all the statues now? I wish they would bloody well get to all these bastard men who all through our lives have got statues and books and streets named after them. They were all bastards, you know. So they should all go. But anyway, so then at the back of the book, of course, as you know, is a huge production of the research I did called Who Was John McGarvey Smith? And I don't know whether people will even bother to read this, but
I found it absolutely fascinating.
yes,
But I mean, that helped
total
by the
research,
fact,
but it doesn't really have anything to do with Alice, you see. That's the trouble.
well, I know, but I mean, one of the reasons, you know, this is how being a reader affects you, that I became really fascinated with the afterword, was that I knew people in that afterword, or I knew their descendants, because of the battle that he had over the patenting of anthrax and things like,
Exactly.
you know, and the being known for that. So, you know, that was another weird kind of thing that came up, you know, Pauline finding stuff out also about Beaconsfield,
Yeah.
and having these
Living there.
hardly
She
relatives and best, you know, family best friends whose family are involved in it. So it was very odd, but a kind of marvelous thing in a way.
Well, I think you've published it in this book. One day, someone who really counts is going to get to read this, and they're going to stand up and they're going to say, these men, first of all, McGarvey Smith, who stole the anthrax vaccine from John Gunn, and John Gunn died very early, very young, 58. McGarvey Smith changed the name of it to the McGarvey Smith vaccine. It was John Gunn's vaccine. That's gone on forever. He made a fortune out of it. He then got completely done over by these MLCs, these men, these Dr. Wall, all these upright men. And if you go and read about them in the dictionary biography, you'll see how upright and what noble men they were. McGarvey Smith was a noble man who gave, all the people who wrote about him knew he was a bastard, but they played this game, especially one particular journalist who is, oh, if I met him, I'd stick a pen in his throat. He's gone anyway. They're all gone. But this is research. This is so meticulously researched that and you checked it out as well, but there had no compunction in writing about this man. No man is going to write about this man and expose the truth of those other men who were all members of the Legislative Assembly, all these upright men who stole everything and stole his stuff as well. I mean, you just, it's been ringing through my mind with what's happening now, pulling down statues of this and that and taking John Cleese down, because just, you know, there are so many more worthwhile people to destroy out there, not John Cleese, for God's sake, doing the goose step. I mean, people are, you know, it's the female voice has got to rise now. We just have to keep going. We can't slack off, you know. Women are doing it. Your publications are amazing, what you're doing. You know, you're just feeding constantly. I don't know how you're doing it. It's amazing.
I mean, what else do you do? It's a bit like you know, you find this clue and you follow it and you chase it and so forth, and then you write it, and you know, and then we get your book, or we get the manuscript from somebody else, and you know, it's got something in it that is different, that's new, that needs to be said, or is being said in such a beautiful way, or is so different. All those things come into it. And but we know that if women's voices aren't published, and if the ideas that we're trying to put out there don't get published, then we wouldn't ever know about Harriet or Alice or many of the other women in your book, nor would we know about the dastardliness of people like John McGarvey Smith.
I know.
And these are things that need to be worked out in different ways. So I think what you've given us with that discussion around why you wrote the book and so forth is so rich, and I just really hope that people will run out and buy your book and read it cover to cover, because it is just fantastic, and the wonderful photo on the front of the gymnasium.
I'm going to keep talking.
Great photos. Yeah, okay. Great photos in it also of a whole lot of other things, some wonderful cartoons.
Okay.
And the photos.
I'm going to show you. That's Roxy discovering her grave.
Oh, fantastic.
And that's the inscription down there, which is covered in the grass. So Florence is around that side, Edith and Selma around that side. That's just the grave there. Such a dear little grave. This is Harriet's grave, which I discovered in Cheltenham. I have now dug it all up and put tan bark and a big circle of stones around it, so I've cleaned that up. This is Brill's Baths back in the 1890s, which is or a little bit late now, but that's where Harriet taught swimming. I'll just quickly put these in because they're fascinating. This is where Harriet lived in Poole Valley in Brighton. Now, that is Rowell's Clock Factory. That was her maiden name, Harriet Rowell. Rowell's Clock Factory. That was where she lived for many, many years. Her father was the clock factory. And I've been there and I've walked down that little alley. And I might even have that picture. It's exactly, see, this is the thing. If you go to England and you do research, everything's still there. These buildings are all still there. That's 1939. There's the building, and the Rowells are still there. And that little alleyway, I went up there and took all these other photos. Now I want to show you the difference between. This is where Alice Moon lived. Okay, that's her front door, and this is in the Stane in Brighton, the old Stane, and this is her house. Check it out, so you can understand the difference between her upbringing and Harriet's. Right there. Yeah. So
that is, it's fantastic to see those, and it really makes a difference just in terms of understanding that class difference and the life experience and all of those things. But both of them were extraordinary women. They were both extraordinary and differently so, and that I think you capture really, really well.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Well, thank you for publishing me.
It's been a pleasure.
And I must admit that when you wrote to me and you said, I'm taking it with me to America, and then I didn't hear from you, and I said, oh, look, you'd lose faith very quickly, I must admit, when you've done something like this. And then I got that phone call, can we meet you in Melbourne? I love your book. And it was like, holy shit, fantastic. It's the best thing you can hear someone say, I love your book, especially if she's a publisher.
I think we had a conversation in the cafe next door to Spinifex about a year earlier. And I must admit, when you really talked at us that day. When we were there that day, I had no idea what you were talking about, who you were talking about, what the story was about. I just knew there was this incredible passion that had to somehow be dealt with. But so I wasn't too surprised when you sent your manuscripts. It was very small writing. I had to make it bigger.
Oh God, yes. I can't read anything. I've got to go to 16 points straight away on anything. It's hopeless. Well, now we're just about done because we're Zoom virgins here. We try to trying to work this out. So,
I think probably is there anything else you want to say about the
just
book?
where can people get a copy of it? They have to go to Spinifex website?
Well, the Spinifex website is probably the easiest thing because lots of bookshops have really reduced their orders during
Well,
the pandemic.
they only get them when someone wants them, you know.
Yes,
So
yes.
hopefully you'll buy
To
this.
get it faster then, but I also know that some of the Dimmicks shops have your book, particularly the Camberwell one, maybe Taronga. You can also get it in a library. Readings and Glee books are both usually have our books. So and there are other independent bookshops. Will order the book in. So whatever's the easiest way for people to get a hold of the book.
It's good to go to an independent bookshop and order it there because that sort of helps.
It helps to support the whole book.
Otherwise, it's Spinifex.
www.spinifexpress.word.com.au. And if you just stick Spinifex Press into Google, and if you put the title of the book Making Trouble as well, it'll come up, boom, under the search page.
And I do explain why I wrote Tongued with Fire, which was a quote from T.S. Eliot, 4 quartets, which explains where I ended up being when these women talk to me, like between the living and the dead. What the dead had no speech for when living, they can tell you being dead. The communication of the dead is tongued with fire beyond the language of the living. So I was burnt by these women. I was burnt. Yeah.
And I think that's a wonderful place to stop because it's also the start of the book. So we've come full circle.
Great.
And thank you very, very much.
Thanks, Susan Hawthorne.